Good evening. My name is Alan Journet. I'm one of the co-facilitators of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, and I would like to welcome you to this, our third COVID-inspired Zoom and live stream Facebook general meeting. This evening, as you can see on the screen, we're going to enjoy Rhianna Simes, and we'll get back to that in just a second. But before we get there, a couple of little housewarming tips. If you're joining us on Zoom, at the top of your screen, click on View Options and select the side-by-side setting, and that will give you a much more satisfactory experience. If you have any questions as we're going through the program, please type them into the chat box and hit send, and we will have a collector picking up the questions. We will stop once in a while during the presentation to answer some of the questions, and then we'll have questions at the end as well. You will, however, be muted for the presentation. So the only way to ask questions is through the chat box. If you're with us on live stream, please type any questions you have in the comment box. And again, we'll have somebody collecting the questions. And so when we have the question breaks, your questions will be collected together and posed to our speaker. On behalf of SOCAN, of course, I would like to welcome you to our program. And as we usually do, I'm going to ask you to think for a moment, just to get your mind set for the program. What exactly is regenerative agriculture? And I'll give you a minute or so to think that one through. Okay, we seem to be having a little problem with our technology here. I don't know why that is. My screen is just not advancing. Rhianna Simes is a plant nerd, so she says, who is passionate about local food, seed sovereignty, and building community. She grew up in Texas, moved to the United States, and recently retired from OSU Extension Service, where she developed the infamous Land Stewart program, the Citizen Fire Academy, and coordinated the equally famous Master Gardener program. She has a master's degree, Master of Science degree in Education and Botany from SOU. Rhianna lives with her husband and two small children on their 1-acre educational mini farm, Verdant, Phoenix, specializing in organic plant starts, perennial food, healthy soil, and natural farming. She serves on the board of Southern Oregon Seed Growers Association. She is co-director of Cultivate Oregon and coordinates Rogue Seed Keepers. She serves as chair of the Rogue Valley Food System Network Council and is working with Emerging Futures on food waste education. In her spare time, she offers presentations such as tonight's offering. Take it away, Rhianna.
Right. Okay. Good evening, friends. Nice to be here with y'all. Usually I do a little check-in to see if there are any other recovering Texans in the crowd. It's good to know who I'm working with, and recovery is a process. As Ellen mentioned, I'm happy to be here. My name's Rhianna Simes, and let's see, as he mentioned, I worked for 10 years at the Oregon State University Extension Service, and know some of you from my work there, and so nice to see you tonight. Welcome. This is a picture of our farm right outside Talent in Phoenix on Culver Road. We have what we call a 1-acre mini farm. And we're really inspired by the small farm movement, which is really highlighting all of the food that you can grow on 10 acres or less. The majority of Oregon farms are 10 acres or less and really very productive. We grow a lot of our own food. We're very strictly organic and also no-till for over 10 years. And our two young kids are part of our inspiration and our motivation for the farming that we do and for the practices that we're implementing on our property. So this presentation is meant to be kind of a step 2 to Dr. Ray Seidler's excellent regenerative agriculture class that he teaches for the Master Climate Protectors. And so this is more of the regenerative gardening look. So I'm really interested in applied learning. And so how can we take the concepts of regenerative agriculture and bring them into our front yards, our backyards, into our landscapes? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And if any part of your homework was to bring a soil sample. And so please get your soil sample out if you brought one. So part of what we're doing tonight is really to understand the relationship of food and agriculture and of food and culture, and then also soil and climate. So we're really weaving together this interconnected web that affects our lives daily, that affects our lives on a global scale. And just to ground us in the conversation tonight, if you did bring some soil, I want you to take a little sniff and really enjoy the smell of the microbes in your soil, hopefully that, reduce your blood pressure, that help, with feelings of euphoria and happiness and calm. So just a little soil sniffing to get us started. So part of what we're talking about tonight is really around carbon sequestration and how to keep carbon in the soil. So many of you are very familiar with this cycle and understand the impacts of where we can participate in this relationship here. So where we're going to be focusing tonight is really in the carbon in the decomposition, and really what we can do in our gardens, in our landscapes, is really affect that. At the bottom of the screen, you see that it says soil organic matter, carbon-based material. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time this evening really focused on that aspect of our landscapes and of soil. And we're going to keep asking, why should I care about this? And what do I do with this on a Sunday? And I really want to make sure that the learning that we're doing really applied, and that you know how to apply it in your backyard. So what we're focusing on is, how do we prevent carbon from being exposed to the air? How do we keep carbon in the soil and keep carbon sequestered partly as soil organic matter? So Alan posed the question, what is regenerative agriculture? So this is one definition, shorthand. We're focusing on enriching the soil that improves watersheds. It increases biodiversity and enhances ecosystem services. So in many ways, this is a complete reversal of what conventional or chemical agriculture has looked like for many years. Regenerative agriculture is really going back to a much more traditional way of farming and relating to the land, where actually the soil is regenerated after participating or after interacting with it. So shorthand, regenerative agriculture and regenerative gardening means we're leaving things better than we found it. And that can be a really great kind of litmus to test it, to kind of tap in to see what you're doing on your property. Am I leaving things better than I found it within the ecosystem and how water moves? So let's look at this a little bit closer. What does this mean? Like, those are great concepts, but what do I do on a Sunday to actually live this? And that's where I want us to arrive at the end of the presentation, is really, how do I live this? So again, we're talking about, for this conversation, we're talking about regenerative organic agriculture. We're not talking about chemical inputs of any kind. And so part of the reason we're talking about this tonight, again, is because as carbon is restored and held in the soil, it actually continues to improve and then hold more carbon. So how do we do that? How do we enrich the soil, slow the water down with very little inputs, and really leave things better than we found it? So this is a pretty dramatic slide and showing about a traditional landscape or a garden that's more conventional, has a lot of chemical inputs, uses a lot of water, has a lot of waste. You can see there on the left. And then on the right, you can see a more sustainable landscape, which again, we're talking about regenerative landscapes or regenerative gardens that actually use less water, have less waste, and actually require less maintenance. So good news. So how do we do this? So it actually really comes down to very simple strategies. And I think that that is what's really important to remember, is that this is complex science that has been brought down into that we can look at from a lens that is really pretty simple to apply. And so much of what we're talking about tonight is just don't mess it up. Nature does this without our help, and we actually don't need to overthink it. We don't need to outsmart it. We just need to participate in this natural process that's happening already. So that means minimize soil disturbance. So minimize disturbance to me means things like we want to reduce or eliminate the need for rototilling or tilling of any kind, dragging, disking, all of those things. Those are mixing the soil, that's mixing the soil horizons and killing microorganisms, all of which goes against regenerative gardening and actually contributes to a lot of problems. So other regenerative strategies, we're going to go into these a little bit more. Keep the soil covered and really protect it as habitat. It can be easier for us to see habitat in the forest with big trees or the meadow, but it really takes a different lens and a different mindset to start to look at soil as habitat. And so with that habitat, we have to protect the habitat is there. So that means that we're helping to slow water, we're spreading it and letting it sink in, and we're fundamentally keeping carbon on site. So that means wood chips, wood waste, trimmings, grass clippings, food scraps. We're going to talk about some of those in a minute, but we're wanting to keep the carbon on site and in the soil. We're avoiding chemical inputs, and for goodness sake, we're avoiding plastics. And so we're utilizing waste streams that would ordinarily go to landfills or create a problem somewhere else, and we're keeping those things in place and bringing them back to the soil to be worked with. This is a really great picture behind us where you can see intercropping. There's more diversity there. It's not all one thing. You can see it's nicely mulched. You can see that there's diversity around the edges and within the garden. So really kind of showcasing some of the strategies we're talking about tonight. So we have to ask ourselves, is this regenerative farming? Even though a plant could save people and really help people with medicine, that's great. But look at the plastic. Look at what he's walking on. Do you see life or habitat there? If you're a pollinator, where are you going to live? If you're a beetle, where are you going to forage? This is not regenerative. This is the same extraction mentality that has driven commercial and conventional agriculture for years, and we've seen that degradation all around us, certainly here in Southern Oregon. So science is really, not only is the organic movement very on board with these principles, but we're seeing Rodale and others really start to look at the impacts and study really the lasting impacts of what regenerative agriculture and regenerative gardening can do. And here you can see that it could sequester more than 100% of the current annual CO2 emissions. And that the practices work to maximize carbon fixation while minimizing the loss of carbon once returned to the soil, reversing the greenhouse effect. Rodale. This is a great paper, very accessible. So let's really look at this. These are the colors of soil, some of the soils around Oregon. And let's really look at the implications on soil and what is soil and why should we really care and what are we going to do about it? Well, healthy soil is the cornerstone of life. It is the cornerstone for biological diversity. both with plants, animals, birds, all the way up the food chain and back down. Of course, it's essential for food production. The water benefits of slowing the water, filtering the water, keeping the water in place, all, of course, essential to life, and that all benefits from soil. And then what we're talking about specifically tonight is carbon storage. That with that, those carbon chains are stored there, and how do we do that? How do we keep honoring the soil and move forward our gardens at the same time? So what is soil? I really like this slide because it helps us really understand the important components of what we're working with soil. So soil, a quarter of soil is air, is pore space, are holes and micropores, large pores, wormholes, tunnels. A quarter of what makes up soil is water held within those pores. 45% is the mineral particles, so that is rock, the bedrock. And then you can see organic matter making up, and then humus, roots, and organisms that make up that those percentages there. So why should we care about this? We care about this because this is what shows us about the importance and the detriment of compaction. That when in a conventional or a chemical agriculture situation where they're tilling, they're mowing, they're tilling, they're plowing, they're bringing equipment on, what that's doing to the soil over time is compacting it. It's literally pushing the air out. And we see here that the components of healthy soil, that a quarter, 25% of what makes up healthy soil is pore space. And so why don't things grow where the tire ruts are in the field? It's because the air has been squeezed out. The pores have been squeezed out, and that's part of the problem. So when we're looking at regenerative gardening, we have to put away our rototillers. We have to park our tractors and put away the rototillers, because we understand that if we want healthy soil, we must maintain that pore space for air and for water. Again, we're thinking of soil as habitat. And when we think of habitat, what does all life on earth need to, well, most life on earth need to live? It needs air, it needs water, it needs food, it needs habitat, all of those things. There are some anaerobes. Don't ask Alan that question. We're just talking generalities. Okay, we're gonna keep going. So let's look at this. This organic, so an inputs in an organic system, part of what we're talking about in gardening is, you can see on the left, we're actually we're feeding the soil to feed the plant. So we're providing nutrients through soil, through organic matter. We've got the microorganisms that are getting fed, and they poop and feed and poop and feed. And there is a net gain. There is more nitrogen produced just when we're feeding the soil. This is incredible. And that then those microorganisms make the soil nutrients available. On the right side of the screen, you can see traditional fertilizers, or a more, what they would call conventional or chemical approach to agriculture, which is all focused on chemistry. They say, oh, well, plants are just reduced to needing NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And so they create these chemical concoctions to try and meet the needs of this living being, a plant. And so you can see they're two fundamentally different systems. They're two fundamentally different ways of looking at the ecosystem and the soil. One is really acknowledging the biology and supporting the biology through looking at soil as habitat. And the other is really an extractive mentality where we're just adding chemical inputs. So for our purposes, what we're doing on a Sunday is we're putting away the chemical fertilizers. We're putting away the Miracle-Gro. We're putting away those chemicals with salts. And that we're really seeing that the soil is an ecosystem to be protected. It's an ecosystem to be protected. Elaine Ingham knew this, and she tried to tell all kinds of people about this. She was working for Oregon State University, And she came out with the revolutionary comment that plants don't actually need fertilizers. And guess who was really upset about that? The fertilizer industry. And guess who rebelled? And the chemical industry. Because what she said is that when you have a thriving ecosystem in the soil, which is habitat, that you have a net gain of nitrogen. You have an increase of the nutrients needed for plant growth. And so she talked about the soil food web. She showed that here is how energy and nutrients move between organisms, and that as they're eaten and poop and decay and eaten, poop and decay, that the soil builds in fertility. And this was a revolution in agriculture that we are still living through. That to see the soil as alive and to care about the biology in the soil is something really phenomenal. So I could teach an entire 6-hour class about boosting your biology and really looking at mycorrhiza and mycorrhizal fungi. These are plant roots. These are fungal roots that connect with plants, and they have a relationship where they're able to transport nutrients through these membranes and through these tiny roots and mycorrhizal, these fungal hairs that can access incredible distances and transport needed nutrients, or really whatever the plant is requiring. Paul Stamets has some incredible videos about this online and on YouTube, and really talks about how the importance of maintaining these mycorrhizal systems in your garden. And so guess what kills mycorrhiza and kills these interconnected roots and hyphae? Chemical fertilizers, synthetic, herbicides of all and pesticides of all kinds. Rototilling kills these networks. So part of what I'm trying to do tonight is to help you kind of fall in love with some of these soil creatures, and that you love them so much that you possibly harm them. Which one is habitat? If you were a creature, if you were an insect, if you were an earthworm, where would you want to live? Which one is really habitat? And so if we're utilizing soil for a chemical concoction, then a blank slate might work. If we're growing soil for healthy gardens and a regenerative system that actually improves over time, we are going with the left one, with the mulch, the crop stubble, the carbon on the ground, the live roots in the soil. Keep the soil covered and really protect your allies. I like these so that plants are still growing and that you're protected. So part of what we're wanting to do, again, is to minimize disturbance. Do not rototill. Layer the materials. When I encourage people in my soils classes that think about, where do you find the nicest soil on your whole property? It's underneath the trees. And that's because the trees just layer organic matter each season. Every season almost, they're layering organic matter over time. And that's what we want to replicate in our own gardens. So we're going to take a break in just a minute, but I just want to share this one while we're on rototilling and tilling, to really look at, again, if 25% of soil is supposed to be pore space, air, water, you can see with intensive tillage, the lack of pore space, the lack of air and movement, and actually the plow pan, the compacted area without pore space that roots have a hard time going through. You can see on the right, a long-term no-till. Look at the channels from the rootlets. Look at the channels and the pores where air and water can exist for plants to access. This is so important, because part of what we're wanting to do is stabilize the habitat, stabilize the aggregates. We used to call them dirt clods. We had no idea that actually it was a whole universe in our hands of fungal hyphae, of bacterial glues and organic matter. that allows for all these benefits in the soil. It allows for water to move. It allows for the biology to have a habitat that they can thrive in. It allows for pore space and for happy roots. It's absolutely key to keep these dirt clods, to keep these aggregates in place, because again, they help maintain the space for air and water, which is essential for healthy soil. People have known this for years. We as a people, for our generations, have been gardening this way. This is a very traditional way of gardening. We're keeping it carbon in the soil because it's valuable. We're not rototilling. Nobody else in nature turns things over to the degree that mechanical agriculture wants us to. We're adding organic matter. We're layering it. We're not stirring it in. We're layering it. We're planting seeds to create that pore space, and we're encouraging diversity. If you're not familiar with Root Stout, she is a radical woman who gardens naked and has 2 feet of mulch in her garden, and is just radical, amazing elder to look into if you're not familiar with her. So I'm going to transition here into a little bit more of a how-to, and this might be a good moment to take some questions and have just a little pause, and then we will resume in just a few minutes.
All right. Thank you. This is really great information. We've got a couple questions that have come in. The first one being, what are some countries who are really kind of leading the charge with regenerative agriculture? And what can we learn from what's being done across the world with these practices?
What can we learn from across the world about what?
About using these kinds of practices.
Well, we'll talk about regenerative agriculture examples towards the end, and we'll be highlighting what's happening around the world, well, at least with the Australia program, and we'll talk about that at the very end with the soil symposium that's coming up in November. But just to say that the practices that we're sharing here, I was really inspired by Masanobu Fukuoka from Japan, where he came from an agricultural extension background, similar to the one that I came from, and he started looking in his fields and realizing, why are we taking the rice chaff off the fields? It has so much benefit. And he started realizing that, gosh, if we return that rice chaff back to the field, look what happens. And he started to see all these spiders. And he started to say, well, what are these spiders doing? And when he realized that the spiders were actually helping him in his field and were a predatory insect that was an ally to be supported. And so that's just one small example that he really termed natural farming, which meant really working with the natural systems around us and replicating the ones that have a benefit to us, like layering, like the trees do. So these are practices really being implemented in many places around the world. But just to share a little bit more about Fukuoka and One Straw Revolution, if you haven't read it, it's really an incredible and inspirational look at a new kind of farming, a new and old kind of farming.
That's great. Jerry has a question. Jerry lives in Selma on a 10-acre place with about 3 acres of orchard and garden. Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I'm going to save this question to the end, actually, because I think you might talk about it a little bit. I think it'll be really good at the end. I'm actually going to move on to a question about worm food that you can purchase. Is it good for the soil?
Worm castings, probably worm castings. I think that, did you say worm poop or worm food?
Worm food was the question.
Okay, well, so I think what's important there to mention is that the worms are essential in making nutrients available to your plants. Worms need something to eat. if worms don't have something to eat, they will not be there. So if you have just a row of tomatoes and nothing else growing there and no mulch on the soil, you probably don't have many worms because there's nothing for them to eat. So the essential thing is for your gardens is to make sure that you're feeding the creatures in the soil and so that they can feed the soil. So that looks like adding your coffee grounds on the soil surface, or putting your, banana peels, or, it could be adding, we're going to talk about different types of organic matter, but it means, really layering organic matter so that it rots and so that worms will eat it and then improve your soil. So then worm castings are amazing. Worm castings, another way to say worm poop or worm manure, and they're amazing because the nutrients in them are water soluble and available to plants. So it's one of those things where, yes, if you want to buy that product, you just want to think about that you're wanting an aerobic system, because a quarter of soil is air. So you don't want to buy worm castings that are in a sealed jar or a sealed container, because that means that they are now anaerobic. There's no oxygen in there. So if you buy those products, just make sure that there's holes or that it's fresh and you use it right away. So those are a couple: worm food and worm castings. And I know that emerging futures coming up, that we do a lot of education around food waste. And so we will be selling worm compost, red wigglers for vermicomposting systems. And maybe that'll be something we can talk about in the future. It is really fun and great way to use your food scraps and make sure to bring those nutrients back to the soil. Okay, Ellie,
Great.
how are we doing?
So the questions keep coming in, but I think we'll go ahead and move on, and I'll hand things back to you. And then what we'll do in the end is we'll have another time for questions. If you're just joining us, you can, and if you're on Zoom, you can enter in your questions in the chat box. If you are watching us on Facebook, go ahead and put your questions in the comment section, and someone is monitoring that and sending them over to me. So I will make sure that they're read. All right, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, friends, for a spirited conversation and for participating. And just while we can all see each other before I share my screen, if you brought soil, let's all smell it together. Does anybody else have any soil to smell? I wish you could smell mine. If we were all together, I'd be passing this around and we'd be talking about what we smell. If you smell fungal, if you smell mushrooms, if you smell, that deep, dank, earthy smell, those are the actinomycetes. You can literally smell the microbes at work. So we'll take a rain check on that for soil sniffing sometime together. So I'll remind you and you remind me, and we'll do that when it's safe to sniff soil together. Okay, here we go. We're diving back in. Ready? Okay, Ruth Stout. We love Ruth Stout. Watch the Ruth Stout video on YouTube or read some of her pieces. She's a hoot. Okay, let's see. I just need a second because my computer's not advancing. Excuse me. All right, here we go. So let's get into some of the strategies. So what I hear quite a bit is people feel intimidated, or they can't really think of a way to deal with weeds except for rototilling them. And I want to introduce a couple of different strategies, because this is generally where people reach, have a hard time. They reach for a product or they reach for their rototiller because they just don't know what else to do. So one opportunity and something we do on our property is called using occultation fabric. It's an occultation method. So occult is to make dark or in the darkness. And so what you're doing is you're using they're using a landscape fabric, but you could also use, what I used is a recycled billboards. So old vinyl billboards that were once up, they were going to become trash, and this is a reuse option. So what you're doing is you're creating a smother, and you're creating an area that gets hot from the sun, from transmitting the heat. Excuse me. But most importantly, you're making habitat for the microorganisms. So many of you might have heard about solarizing. Solarizing is a method that you can use with clear plastic, where you're using the sun to get the soil really hot, and then hopefully that kills off the weeds. But what we see is that it kind of creates a greenhouse effect. It will spike and start to burn. But what happens is that because it's bright, the microorganisms and the arthropods will not move in to eat the material. And so with an occultation method, you're actually both smothering and killing the plants, cutting off sunlight, but you're also encouraging the biology. You're creating habitat so that the biology can come up and eat. And so you're telling the soil, wake up and come eat. So again, this is where you would use something like landscape fabric, a vinyl billboard, temporarily. So you would lay it down just for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on the season, and then take it off. It is not a permanent plastic fixture like you see on the right. That is not regenerative gardening. What we're talking about is using it temporarily as a smother and a heat sink, and then uncovering the soil. So I want to share a little bit about our case study, Verdant Phoenix Farm. We're on Culver Road. Sometimes we have pop-up plant sales, and we have offered tours in the past. So we have been on the property for about 10 years. We have 1 acre, and we've never rototilled ever, and we've never used any chemical inputs of any kind. And actually, we're very low input gardeners, and so we very rarely, if ever, have fertilized with an organic fertilizer. So I want to share this. We have incredible soil. We have ruche silty loam soil, which is amazing texture. But what we found is that the people before us had covered over our soil with landscape fabric. So I want to say that landscape fabric is often passed off in kind of sustainable gardening systems as in a product that's okay to use. And I really want to just share that that is woven black plastic. It's a woven petroleum product. And look what it has done to my soil. What has it done? It's choked. It's made it so it's not getting air. It's not allowed to get the layers of organic that you can see the oak trunk behind you that are layering on. You can see the organic matter, and you can see the layer of what's become clay and basically anaerobic and dead. And so there's been no, it's not sequestering any carbon here, and it's dying. So first off, take the landscape fabric off. That kills your habitat in your soil. So what can you do? You've got a big grassy field and you want to have a garden. Well, here's what we did. It's often called lasagna gardening, where you create a smother. So you've got your cardboard down to smother, and then you're going to start layering organic material on top of the cardboard to start to create your beds. Again, we're still mimicking. We're not mixing. We're not flipping things around. We're just layering organic materials. And we had help. It's a family affair. You can see we're still there. You can see that the grass is still there, but is smothered. And again, we're trying to encourage the soil to start to eat and to go into that mode. Here's what it looks like a couple years ago now that our beds are established, and we plant as much diversity around our garden as we possibly can, again, to encourage beneficials, to help with our allies, to create habitat. So some of the strategies that you can use for amending soils with organic matter, that's what we're talking about, layering organic matter. You can plant seeds. So if you have a really hard place or a larger property, start sprinkling seeds. plant seeds with root types of all different shapes and sizes. Cover crop. Add compost. You layer the materials. Layer them. So improving the soil by seeding, this is common practice, often called a cover crop, but for some reason in people's gardens, they feel like they can't, it's like the connection isn't made. Where this is on the left, where the previous root system from the year past, don't pull up the roots of your plants, don't pull your plants, cut them at the soil surface so that you leave those intricate root systems. So again, you're feeding the soil and you're creating that pore space for air, for water, the essential ingredients for healthy soil. Plants improve the soil. And we could totally geek out about the amazing relationship between all of the exudates, the sugars that plants are exuding that are leaking through their roots to feed the microorganisms. And they're saying, microorganisms, if you live near my roots, I'm going to feed you sugar. And they poop and eat and live and poop and eat and die. And they're releasing nutrient-rich materials and manure right around the root systems. They're getting fed by the exudates. There's really not a lot we have to do. What we have to do is not mess it up. That's what we have to do. We need to let these root systems be massive, let them reach, let them take up the space they need. This is an amazing book, Roots Demystified. You can see on the left, they excavated these root systems to show just how large it is. On the left, you can see the garden carrot that has a root system over 6 feet deep, 5 feet wide, 1 carrot. And so it's feeding the soil sugars, it's feeding the carbon, it's sequestering carbon just by living there. We still haven't really even done anything in the garden yet. We're just layering and planting seeds. But if you are going to do something in the garden, what we really can do is mulch. And mulch is just a way of talking in loving terms about carbonous material, carbonous organic matter we put on the soil to help retain moisture, create habitat, reduce weeds, flow the water, everything that we want to do. Mulch. If you have decomposed granite and you don't know what to do, mulch. If you've got clay and you don't know what to do, mulch. It provides habitat, food, water, shelter for living soil, and it creates large particles so that you have air, pore space. So on our property, this slide is actually several years old. I mean, we've had more than 30 yards of wood chips, probably 20 yards of compost, leaves, over more and more. And we're trying to track those additions so that we know how much organic matter we're bringing in and how much we're keeping on the property. Here's a mountain of wood chips that turned out to be a lot of fun one year. I don't know if y'all remember when we got that big snow a couple of years ago. We got 11 inches and the wood chip pile was a hit. What we use on our property is we layer card to prevent weeds. So we try to protect the trunk flare of our trees by layering around it. And that prevents damage from weed whackers. It creates habitat. It builds soil. So again, here's us in our farm here about 7 years ago, layering materials to create new beds, leaving the organic matter that's grown there. You can see the corn stubble, leaving those roots in place. Layer, don't stir. And then plant diversity to increase your soil organic matter, to sequester carbon, to regenerate what's there. And we're wanting to plant diversity so that we're using these intercropping systems to really maximize habitat. Here's the limited diversity just in our garden here. And then here's what we created, because that's we're wanting to create diversity in the soil, diversity above the soil. So when you're thinking about your IPM strategies, your integrated pest management, these are the same principles. It's about protecting the soil and really limiting disturbance and increasing diversity. Same strategy. So here's a couple sources of organic matter. You can get moldy grain, grass clippings. You want to be careful about animal bedding, about wormers and things, but we can find organic matter all over that can really help our soil. So just to recap, as we're kind of finishing up here, the regenerative principles we're talking about for gardening that leaves things better than when we found it. Minimize disturbance, keep the soil covered, and protect it as habitat. That we remember that water is life and that we're regenerating the systems that we depend on. And what if it's a big hoax and we just do all this and all we get is just beautiful soil that grows good food? So there was a question about what's being done across the globe and about examples of regenerative agriculture. Cultivate Oregon and SOCAN are partnering to offer this incredible virtual symposium November 10th and 17th, enabling regenerative agriculture. So getting paid for improving soil health. Really encouraging all types of land managers and gardeners to learn about how farmers can get financial rewards for producing healthy soils, how we can reward collectively the behavior that we want to see more of. So we're going to be hearing about some of the government and industry options that are available, some of the emerging policies. We'll hear about some of the frontline accomplishments of carbon farmers around the globe, and we'll learn more about these future carbon credit programs. It's really important that we can talk about these programs so we can incentivize the behavior we want to see on larger scale. So please go to soilsymposium2020.org. And if you click join, you'll get updates and new information about the program coming up. I want to share, this is our website, Verdant Phoenix Farm, and a picture of our property here. And I would be happy to answer emails. I do landscape consultation independently. And I know that Cultivate Oregon and Emerging Futures are going to be having some really great programs into the future to support these topics. So I know we have a couple more questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Ellie, look to you for guidance about any questions.
Yes, so we've got some questions here. First one is from Jerry, and he is living in Selma on 10 acres with about 3 acres of orchard and garden, no-till and thrifty water methods. We mulch with burlap bags. However, we are surrounded by hemp and cannabis grows that outgas their carbon into the sky. Question: what are some strategies to convince our neighbors to use regenerative approaches?
I think that leading by example does a lot. And there's a great book by Gabe Brown that talks about dirt to soil, or the title is Dirt to Soil. And part of what he did was he started seeing, gosh, when I'm farming with all these chemical inputs and I'm rototilling, I'm just spending more on inputs and it keeps getting more and more expensive and my profit margin keeps going down. What's going on? And then he started realizing he just didn't have enough money for fertilizer, so he didn't use it. And he started realizing, wow, I'm making all these changes. So I feel like this is a moment of be the change you wish to see. And I think that we as humans respond to things that are beautiful and full of life, and we can't help to have a reaction to that. And so I think garden well and people notice. And you could just drop off a copy of Gabe Brown's book on their door. I mean, that would be the other thing.
That's great. Victor says when he's driving around his neighborhood, which is mostly a suburban area, I frequently see my neighbor's grass clippings and other yard waste on the sidewalk. I've always felt conflicted about liberating them for my own gardening purposes, but I hesitate because I can't be sure what they do to their yards. How much of a concern is it that possible chemical inputs from their yards into my own? Is pesticide usage from their trimmings, etc., generally a non-issue as long as it's for an area that has non-edible plants?
Yeah, you know, so I go around and pick up leaves and really anywhere I can find them in the fall. I feel like it's really convenient that people put them in plastic bags for me and leave them on the curb. I can't fathom that people would send that to the landfill and think that that's okay in any way. So I appreciate that they leave those for me. But I am picky that if I don't see any dandelions in the yard, if I don't see any, you know, weeds or oxalis or clover in the yard, I don't take their leaves, because you know that, you know, there are pre-emergence, things like that, that are, you know, very harmful and persistent herbicides that can stay in that material and really harm your garden. So you want to, I think before you would collect, especially for grass clippings, you'd really want to make sure that there's some good weed seeds in there, and you know, and have a conversation. I've actually connected with a couple of my neighbors over that, and they think I'm strange, but we made friends, and they are, you know, help me out with material. So I think there's ways that you can make smart decisions about it, but it is something that you want to take seriously because of those persistent herbicides and insecticides. Yeah,
Definitely.
great question.
If the soil in your yard is already very compacted, what can you do to remedy this that doesn't involve tilling? Can you use that layering method that you talked about?
Yes. So this I would totally ask y'all if we were in a different context, because I feel like, what would we do? What are the components of healthy soil? 1, air, pore space. How do you get pore space into the soil? Seeds, plant seeds. What we also did is that we walked around with a pitchfork and we created pore space. If you have golf shoes, wear your golf shoes around, or, you know, just get little pores into the soil. You don't have to rent a machine to do that. You can just poke it. But planting seeds is the best way. I'm obsessed with daikon radish. If you have, daikon radish is one of the most satisfying things. It germinates fast and you get huge results. And so I would plant some root crops in that area, and they're beautiful and you can eat them and great for the pollinators. So we talked about creating pore space through adding organic matter, you know, creating physical space, pores, or planting seeds. But no matter what the question is, I'm going to say again and again, layer organic matter. So if somebody was like, well, what do I do with clay soil? I'd be like, layer organic matter. Well, what about my soil is sandy? Layer organic matter, because that's what the earth taught us to do.
Great, yeah. Does the use of hybrid seeds or saplings hamper the regenerative process?
No, using hybrid seeds would not hamper the regenerative process. Hybrids would prevent you from saving seed. So you could argue that regenerating your seed supply would be part of that holistic approach. So planting hybrids would be a barrier to that, because you don't know what you're going to get. The seed of a hybrid will give you both the parents and not necessarily what you were planted in the first place. If you plant an heirloom, then you are more sure to that prodigy will be then what you planted. So it doesn't, I think that it's really best case scenario to plant heirloom locally adapted seeds, which we have access to as a community. And I will mention that Rogue Seed Keepers is supporting a program called Seeds to the People, where we're mailing seeds that we got out of a dumpster. Someone was going to throw away 11 banana boxes of seeds. And so we started a program where we send those reclaimed seeds to people who need them. And so if that's you or someone you know, that's an opportunity. And so feel free to email me about that. That's a program through Cultivate Oregon that is being supported by the Rogue Seed Keepers. So great questions, friends. I hope that you have some strategies in your own. Can those seeds be sent overseas? If you do the customs paperwork, I'll send them to you. You deal with customs, I'll do the rest. But I know we're getting close, and but thank you for the great questions. I know that I gave some links, provide some links to Kathy. I really hope that, especially with SOCAN being a partner, that you all put the November soil symposium on your calendars, the 10th and 17th. It's going to be a really dynamic program that I hope you'll all show up for. So thank you for having me tonight, and for being, I wish that we could have been together, but let's have a rain check on our in-person connection. But thank you for inviting me, and that was really fun. Thank you so much. Let's do it again. Let's do part 2 sometime.
Thank you so much, Rhianna. That was wonderful. And we do have email links that we'll share in just a minute. Eric, if you can unmute yourself, Eric's going to make just a couple of comments about precipitation and where we are there.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. So we have a situation which is increasingly common in the Bear Creek Valley. We are in an arid environment anyway, but the last decade or two, things have really dropped with regard to precipitation. Right now, we're almost 5 inches below our normal of 17.4 inches at this time of the water year. Water year starts October 1st, goes to September 30. And that's a significant percentage, but so many of the previous years also had drought conditions. There's drought conditions, in fact, declared in various parts of Oregon and in the southwest part of Oregon. So given that, if you are in a city and you have a water bill, then you can trace the amount of water you use. If you're in the county, you get your water through 3 irrigation districts, and this information has been shared with the 3 irrigation districts, and you can go to their websites for information on regenerative agriculture. Rhianna's presentation, in addition to improving soil moisture, consider soil moisture, of course, as your water bank over the season, and mulch. Rhianna, I'm expecting that you have been using, maybe noticing use of less irrigation water. Is that true?
Yes, you're so right. And we're actually taking whole areas of the landscape off of irrigation and just mulching. So because we have our fungal community really strong, we've been mulching for years. We've built up that soil organic matter. So you're right, Eric. We're now taking some plants just completely off of irrigation now.
Thank you, Rhianna. Because if you're in a city, you get a water bill and you probably don't pay much attention to it. It's easy to take water for granted. If you're in the country and you're on a well, it's a different story. So we'll be looking at relatively dry stream flows and parched summer and late summer, fall type precipitation. Soil moisture is going to decrease even more since the irrigation districts are going to, they started late and they're going to shut off early. So what Rhianna and other regenerative agricultural proponents are saying has a real benefit in water quality also. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So my task is to share with you some of the things that are coming up, both SOCAN and other groups. And if you missed something, this will be on live stream or on, it's being live streamed, and we'll save it so you can come back, or you can go to socan.eco/events and get the information. We're going to start up SOCAN at Mountain Meadows again. We're going to have a Zoom meeting. This is for people in Mountain Meadows, but also other people. The focus tends to be on climate change issues in the Ashland area. So if you're interested, let me know and I'll get you on the access for that Zoom meeting. The government group meets monthly and its next meeting is August 10th. Again, a Zoom meeting, and Alan is the person to contact if you're interested in that. They're working on candidate interviews and a possible candidate forum, all on Zoom. This presentation is being made by Alan Journet. It's the third session looking at individual and collective action to address the climate crisis. It's put on by the Jackson County Library. So if you go to the SOCAN calendar, you can get the link to get access to that presentation. Another group that's active is the Forest and Fire Project. Their next meeting is Wednesday, August 19th. And Gary is a person to contact if you're interested in learning about what they're doing and joining them. We also have a group called Sustaining Climate Activists. It's a facilitated monthly support group for those working in climate change, facilitated by Liz Olson and Ken Devaney. That is a Zoom meeting, and Saturday the 22nd is the next one. And our next SOCAN monthly meeting will be Tuesday, August 25th. It's always the last Tuesday of the month. And what we're going to do is start on an idea, one team, one planet. And the meeting on the 25th is going to be the launch of that series that will take place not every month, but will be interspersed with other meetings, exploring the diverse perspectives within the intersection of climate science and climate justice. So hope you will join us for that next month. Our Coastal SOCAN group also meets monthly, and their meetings are Zoom, so we can all take advantage of them. Their meeting is tomorrow, and it's going to be on using renewable energy to produce hydrogen for use as a fuel and electric storage. And Bill at SOCAN.eco is the connect to get that access. The Master Climate Protector meets once a year. The next offering is going to be February 2021. And we've made this decision that we want it to be a face-to-face course. So the plan is that that's what we'll do. And if you register and for some reason we can't, then money will be refunded. But consider Master Climate Protector in February 2021. We have other projects, Climate in the Classroom, Oregon Legislative Districts, Transportation, Voices of the Valley, and there are links to all of these on the website. Other groups in the area that are doing things in the climate arena, ROCPAC is the Rural Oregon Climate Political Action Committee, and the website is there. Encourage you to check that out or contact Hogan if you're interested in their activities. This is the symposium that Rhianna mentioned. It is on SOCAN's website if you want to go there and get the links, or just go to soilsymposium2020.org. And we're really looking forward to what's going to happen with that symposium. So the need for action is there and gets greater every day. We made a link to some different actions that relate to this area. And if you go to socan.eco/action, you'll find the links there. We encourage you to join others to incorporate these ideas in your yard or your garden. There are quite a few people in SOCAN who are interested in doing this. And so if you want support, let us know and we'll help support each other. But doing things by rebuilding our soil and restoring degraded soil biodiversity is really, really important. So it's up to you. Do what you can. No matter how big your space, there's something you can do. So many thanks to Rhianna for her presentation and for what she's offering to our community. Carmen, who you don't see, is in the background taking care of the technology. And Ellie, who you saw, and Lori, who's on Facebook, helping us with questions. We appreciate their help. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's a good group tonight, and it's great to see so many people interested in this topic. If you would go to socan.eco/meeting survey, there's a survey. We'd appreciate your comments. It's pretty short. SOCAN.eco is the website. And if you have any questions that we didn't answer, because there were some really good questions, if you would send them again to SOCAN@SOCAN.e or info@SOCAN.eco, or just put them in the chat again and say you didn't answer my question, and we'll get back to you. And as always, we appreciate financial support. It keeps us going. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We really appreciate all of you and what you're doing in these challenging times. Thank you.